Thank you so much. Our pastor's not with us today. He's in Angola. But we're happy to have Elder Alberto Valenzuela. I almost probably killed that, but we're glad to have him with us today. He's the communication director at our conference office, and he'll deliver our sermon today.
Thank you. It's okay. I have a hard time pronouncing my name myself sometimes. I don't know if I told you this story, that I was visiting through India, going through different of our institutions and with division personnel, and I came to one of our schools and they had a big sign, "Welcome Alberto." And I thought, oh, that's nice. And then at some point I asked the school principal, why does he say "Welcome Alberto"? And I don't know if you're familiar with Southern Asian last name, but they have some pretty complicated last names. And they told me, well, we find your last name very difficult to pronounce. Alberto is much, much easier. So I'm perfectly fine with people just calling me Alberto or Albert or Al, or just call me Hey. I'll respond. And I'm not sure in as advanced as we are in technology nowadays, with this kind of gizmos and displaying on the TV there and up here, and your iPhone or your Galaxy or your tablet or whatnot, or internet, Facebook. Sometimes I wonder what the people if the world lasts longer, how they're gonna describe the first decades of the 21st century. It seems to me that they would say something like they had Facebook, they had iPhones, they had laptops and tablets, they used email, but they were as ignorant as the cavemen. Because in spite of all of our technology and sophistication, there are still quite a few mysteries in our universe, quite a few things that we don't understand, that we know nothing about. And among those mysteries, you may be familiar with some of them, we have the Loch Ness Monster. Remember Loch Ness? Lucky? And the Yeti, the incredible snowman. Even the Egyptian pyramids and the Mayan pyramids are still a mystery to us. Who built them and why? And among the most obscure mysteries, we have the Siberian explosion. An explosion that was 10 times more powerful than the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. That explosion shook Siberia on June 30th, 1908. And some witness reported seeing a pillar of fire or kind of mushroom cloud. There was nothing to account for it. In 1927, Soviet scientists went to the place, they found the place. The devastation covered 800 square miles. To this day, we don't know what caused it. Among some of the other mysteries, one that occurred on May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, 1786. After 6 months of drought, a strong wind dropped a great quantity of black eggs on the city of Port-au-Prince in Haiti. Some of the eggs were preserved in water, and after a few days, they hatched some little thingies that looked like tadpoles. Nobody knows where they came from and what those tadpoles were about. If you visit Costa Rica, all over Costa Rica, you can find perfectly spherical stones. Some of them go from just a few feet in size, and some of them are 8 feet tall, perfectly round, and there's no way to understand how they were built, who, why, what are they doing there. A rancher, Salvador Targino de Joao, in Brazil, reported a rain of small beans on his property in Paraíba State in early 1971. Local agricultural authorities speculated that a storm wind swept the beans out of Africa and they landed on his property in Brazil. Tergino took some of those beans and tried to cook them. He boiled them for hours and hours, and they were very difficult to eat. We still don't understand how that happened. The Voynich manuscript is a 246-page book that is filled with botanical illustrations and written text that to this day we have no idea what the text means, and we don't know what the book is about. When they did some radiocarbon dating, they figured that it was as old as maybe 1,400 years, but we don't know what culture it belongs to. We don't know its purpose. We don't know what it's about. And these are phenomena that are hard to explain, that we don't understand. We have mysteries that go from the Bermuda Triangle to the mystery of our socks disappearing in our dryer. Have you noticed that it doesn't matter what you do, there's always one sock that disappears? I tried all kinds of things. Put them together with clips. Try one of those plastic thingies that you put in the washer and the dryer, and one of them always disappears. The question is, how come it's only one that disappears? Never both of them disappear. Some people have conjecture that when one of your socks disappears, you get one more hanger in your closet. I don't know. And besides these mysteries, we have the mysteries in the spiritual world. St. Paul speaks, among other mysteries, the mystery of having been adopted as God's children in Romans 11:25. The mystery of the resurrection, 1 Corinthians 15:51. The mystery of the gospel, Ephesians 1:9. The mystery of the faith, 1 Timothy 3:9, the mystery of piety, 1 Timothy 3:16, and the mystery of iniquity, 2 Thessalonians 2:7. Of these mysteries, the one that worries me the most is the last one, the mystery of iniquity. Because sin, with all of its implications and consequences, is nothing but a mystery. And I'm not talking about the origin and existence of the devil, but the origin and existence of evil itself. And because the mystery of iniquity teaches all of us directly, I would like to consider it this morning. I think that the parable of the wheat and the tares shows us this mystery in its proper framework. If you go with me to the book of Matthew in chapter 13, we have the words of Jesus, Matthew 13, verses 24 to 30, the first of the Gospels in the New Testament, the first book of the New Testament. Look it up in your Bible or in your phone or your tablet. Jesus told them another parable. I'm reading the NIV. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seeds in your field? Where then does the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you're pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." This parable has been the root of a lot of controversy throughout the centuries. The problem has been its interpretation. Is the parable talking about church discipline? During the 14th century, no, the fourth century, okay? Excuse my Spanish accent. During the 4th century, the Donatists thought that the purity of the doctrine came before anything to keep the peace. And they consider their obligation to exclude from their community anyone guilty of heresy. They saw in this parable a carte blanche to get rid of all heretics, no matter how, no matter when, no matter where. St. Augustine was against this interpretation. And several centuries later, Martin Luther took different stance. In his opinion, the church doesn't have the right to kill heretics, but the state does. And those who favor church discipline do it considering that the field in the parable refers to the church. But is that the case? Does the field represent the church? Is Jesus talking about the right of the church to persecute those that don't agree with its teachings? The context tells us that we cannot come to that conclusion. If you continue reading after the parable of the wheat and the tares, Jesus proceeded to tell them the parable of the mustard seed and then the parable of the leavening. And after he was done, the disciples were still confused. They didn't understand the parable, and they went and asked him, "Could you please tell us about this parable?" In Matthew 13, 37 to 43, we find the explanation of the parable. And there we find that Jesus says that the field is the world. Verse 38. If Jesus hadn't explained this parable the way he did, we could probably come to the conclusion that the field is the church, and therefore we could use a big hammer to go against those that don't agree with our interpretation of the scriptures. But Jesus said that the field is the world. Besides, we should consider that when Jesus told this parable to the disciples, there was no such thing as a church. It took several years before the followers of Jesus came to realize that they formed one body and that they were a church. So Jesus wasn't talking about the church. So then what was the message here? I believe that the message that Jesus was talking about was the mystery of iniquity, his role in the world, and the role that you and I play in the great controversy. I think that the first thing that the parable tells us is that God allowed the existence of evil, but he is not to blame for it. God is not to be blamed for the existence of evil, even though it exists. The parable represents the appearance of evil in a world created by God. Christ wasn't establishing a dogma. He was presenting reality. In his wonderful plans, God created a perfect world. I want you to notice something that the parable tells us. It says that the man planted the field himself. In verse 27, we find the servants coming to him and asking him, "Didn't you plant the seed yourself? Where did those weeds come from?" Evidently, he was a wealthy man because he had servants. But he didn't ask the servants to plant the field. He did the work himself. God planted Adam and Eve in a perfect environment. He gave them everything that they could need to be happy. They didn't lack anything. Their lives weren't tarnished by sour memories, nor filled with the consequences born from the wrong decisions. They did not have a past to forget. Their lives were fresh. They had a fresh smell like a new car or the breath of a puppy. They were naked and they weren't ashamed, says Genesis 2:25. And their nakedness, to me, went beyond not wearing something on. It went beyond not being clothed. They didn't have any visions of any kind. They didn't have anything to hide from anybody. But in this idyllic world, the evil materialized. The parable tells us that the enemy sowed the bad seed during the night. And even today, in some countries of the Middle East, people would curse somebody, telling them that they're going to sow bad seeds in their field. And I know this is the part that you were dying to listen to. The tares, the Latin name is Lolium temulentum, okay? Anybody taking notes? The Latin name is Lolium temulentum, and it's also known as darnel, D-A-R-N-E-L. It is a false wheat. It's a seed that has a strong narcotic effect. It's not just a bad wheat. It's not just something that is going to taste bad. It has a strong narcotic effect. And according to Jewish tradition, the tares originated after the flood as a result of the flood. The Hebrew word is zunin. You taking notes? No? Okay. And according to the Haggadic etymology, the word derives from the root zana, to commit fornication. God is the owner of the seed, of the field, the world. Satan came under the disguise and told the woman, "You shall not die, but shall become like God." And from that moment on, the wheat and the tares have grown together, and it's hard to tell them apart. Because good in this world, sadly, is mixed with evil. Men are capable of the most noble acts and also of the most horrendous crimes. All of this is part of the mystery of iniquity. I think that the disciples understood that the parable had a meaning beyond the field of the wheat and the tares. And I think they figure it has something to do with the mystery of iniquity. They didn't ask Jesus to explain the parable of the mustard and the parable of the leavening. They wanted to know the meaning of this parable. The parable then shows the deeds of the enemy in a perfect world created by God. Evil, in reality, on this planet is not God's fault. He's not responsible for its existence. Second, the parable tells us that God has not appointed any of us as executioners of his judgments. The servant went to the man and asked him, "Do you want us to remove the tares, to remove the weeds from the tares in the field?" And the answer of the master was no. The field is not ready for the weeds to be removed. We need to allow the true nature of the tares to show. We have to be careful not to remove the good weeds along with the bad weeds. In other words, you cannot judge others by what we see. In his wisdom, God has seen that the mystery of iniquity, the separation between the good and the evil, is not only unnecessary, but it is also harmful for his children. It is necessary to allow the children of God the opportunity to grow so that others may see the difference of their lives in this world. They need to take roots. They need to be strong. They need to be firm. In judgment is left up to God. Some of us go through life being busy fighting evil. We are ready to fight anyone that disagrees with us. And from time to time, visiting with friends, they would tell me, "Oh, the Jehovah's Witnesses are coming. Good thing you're here so you can argue with them." Get someone straight about the state of the death, about the beginning of the Sabbath, about the mark of the beast, etc. Because to us, we all look the same and look different at the same time. Because we use the glasses that we wear, the tint in our glasses, to judge those around us, those within the church, as well as those outside of the church. We forget that only God knows what's in everyone's hearts, and He is the only one that can decide about our Christianity or our goodness. We forget that mistakes are like weeds. If we leave them alone, they grow faster. What is hard is to impede their growth. It isn't true that all men are always sinners or as hypocritical as we think they are. You and I only see a portion of their behavior, but we tend to judge them as if we had a full, complete knowledge of it. I'm going to give you a few examples. Back in 1940, Dr. Walter Gross, he was at the head of the Third Reich's Nordic Science Department. He stated the so-called theories of Einstein are merely the ravings of a mind polluted with liberal democratic nonsense, which is utterly unacceptable to German men of science. He was talking about the theory of relativity. In 1897, Lord Kelvin, British mathematician and physicist, former president of the Royal Society, said, "Radio has no future." In 1943, Thomas Watson, chairman of the board of IBM, said, "I think that there is a world market for about 5 computers." And this one is my favorite. This is from General Mukakan Koloso, the Director General of the Zambia National Academy for Space Research. In November 3rd, 1964, he wrote, "I had my first Zambian astronaut on the moon by 1965. We are using our own firing system derived from the catapult. I'm getting my astronauts acclimatized to space travel by placing them in my space capsule every day. It's a 40-gallon oil drum in which they sit, and then I roll them down a hill. This gives them the feeling of rushing through space. I also make them swing from the end of a rope. When they reach the highest point, I cut the rope. That gives them the sense of free falling." I'm not making this up. Jesus did not judge men like we do. Keep in mind that he chose 12 disciples, and one of them was Judas. In the small Samaritan church, we find Simon the sorcerer. In the church of Pergamos, we find those that had the doctrine of Balaam. In the church of Thyatira, there was a woman like Jezebel. In Sardis, there were those whose works had been found not to be perfect before God. And in the churches of Rome, Corinth, Philippi, and Thessalonica, there were those who had names that lived, but were dead in transgressions and sins. In other words, the tares had grown with the weeds within the church itself. Even among the disciples, even among that group of people that Jesus chose himself. If we are to follow the biblical advice, we must allow the tares to make themselves manifest. I think that the motives of the others are the most difficult thing for us to figure out. We may consider somebody to be walking on the wrong road because we judge their motives. It is when those motives take the shape of a behavior, habits, and institutions that we can distinguish between the good and the evil, not before. In the parable, Jesus tells us that we are not to judge others until their motives have fully been manifested to be evil, because otherwise we're risking the destruction of that which is good. I want you to remember that evil in this world wasn't introduced by God. He tolerates it. But he doesn't want it in this world. He doesn't want it in your church. He doesn't want it in your heart. But it is for your own benefit, for my own benefit, that evil exists to prove the quality of your Christian life. Third, the Bible, this parable tells us, I think, that God is the executor of his judgments, not you nor I. We have to be thankful that he has reserved that privilege to himself. There are many things that we do not understand. There are many mysteries beyond any logical explanation. I don't understand why we were flooded a couple of weeks ago here, while in California, the fields are on fire because of lack of water. I don't understand why there is so much hate among men. I don't understand suffering and pain. I don't understand why a child has to die of some terrible disease. I don't understand Einstein's theory of relativity, but that's neither here nor there, is it? Now, if you know a woman, pay attention, if you know a woman that she's pregnant, she has already had 8 children, 3 of them are deaf, 2 of them are blind, 1 is mentally retarded, and she suffers from syphilis. Would you suggest to her to have an abortion? Do you notice? She's pregnant, has had 8 children, 3 of them are deaf, 2 of them are blind, 1 of them is mentally retarded, and she suffers from syphilis. Now, another scenario. Elections are coming up, but this time you are choosing not the President of the United States, you're choosing a world leader, and you have 3 candidates. 3 candidates as world leaders. The first one is commonly associated with corrupt politicians and often consults with astrologers. He has 2 lovers, he smokes 1 cigar after another, and drinks 10 martinis a day. First candidate. Second candidate was fired twice from his work, liked to sleep late, he uses opium, and drinks a quart of whiskey every night. The third candidate is a decorated war hero. He's vegetarian. He doesn't smoke. He would drink an occasional beer, but that's very rarely, and has never had extramarital relationships. Oh, and he's an exceptional public speaker. Who would you choose? Who would you vote for? The first candidate was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The second candidate was Winston Churchill. The third candidate was Adolf Hitler. By the way, what would you suggest the woman with the abortion question? If you had suggested the woman to have an abortion, you would have deprived the world of Ludwig van Beethoven. You see how what we see, what we think, we understand, can be totally beyond our grasp, beyond our understanding? God is responsible for dispensing justice. It is his prerogative. And I'm thankful that that is the case. When you and I look around in our own church, in our own congregation in Baton Rouge, what do we see? Wheat? Do we see tares? I want to finish reading you another parable. The name of the parable, I don't recall who wrote it, but it is titled The Strange One. And I'd rather read it to you because I'm really bad at telling stories, that you may have noticed. Once, there was a colony of ants with only 5 legs. Whenever they walked, they went 1, 2, hitch, 1, 2, hitch, all along the path. These ants lived on decayed banana leaves and nothing else. I shouldn't say lived, for many of them died. Banana leaves, especially in the rotten states, are rather hard to find. And so these ants had a very hard life. Many died young from overexertion, and starvation. Now, it happened one day that a very strange ant was born among them. This ant had 6 legs. Everyone clicked his tongue in consternation. Many tried the best they could to console the parents on their child's deformity. Some suggested, for the good of the community, that they ought to kill him in infancy. But the mother begged hard, so they let him alone. Strangely enough, the little ant was soon rushing around faster than his elders. This was ominous. And worse than that, he had a very awkward way of walking. Look, they tried to tell him, you don't know how to walk right. You have to go 1, 2, hitch, 1, 2, go hitch. Now, try it properly. So the little ant would try to put a little hitch on his step, but every time he tried, the 6th foot would come down and he'd leave his stitches far behind. They gave up in disgust. When he was half grown, the elder noticed another peculiarity. He was eating breadcrumbs. Stop, they cried. They are poison. You mustn't do that. If you eat even 2 little mouthfuls, you'll die. But the little ant continued eating. They waited to see him fall over dead, but nothing happened. Instead, as the days went on, he grew strong and big, bigger even than the biggest of the grown-ups. This was outrageous. But the real crisis didn't come until he was fully grown. The colony had been told to move quickly from the home to another place, for dreaded river ants were marching against him. The job of moving was very slow, for in order to move the nest, an egg had to be loaded onto the back of an ant. Then 2 other ants climbed on top of his back and rode along, holding the egg in place. They had to keep it from rolling off at every hitch, you see. So the egg was carried along, and the ant under the egg would be more dead than alive when they arrived. They had just started moving their eggs in this way when they noticed the 6-legged monstrosity coming toward them at a rapid clip. Hurry up, you lazy thing, they cried between puffs. You have to work too. They had barely gotten the words out of their mouth when he passed them on the double, and he was back again carrying an egg, of all places, in his 2 front feet. You can't do that, they screamed. You'll break it. And anyways, you'll never get there. I've already been there and back twice, he replied, and I haven't broken one yet. Let me show you how to do it. That was the last straw. Rage came up in their throats and choked them. They dropped their eggs in a heap and rushed at him. He has a devil, cried his enemies. He is beside himself, cried his friends. He perverted the people. He is spoiling our nation. He is teaching others this perfidy. Away with him. Kill him. There, they growled in grim satisfaction sometime later. He'll never try to teach us again. We'll solve our own problems. Thank you. Then they went back to work. 1, 2, hitch. 1, 2, hitch. 1, 2, hitch. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those that place their own lives before the Lord for him to judge and leave the judgment of those around them to the Lord." In their book, Common Prayer, A Liturgy for Ordinary Radicals, Shane Claiborne, I think, put it in a better way than I could have ever done it. He wrote, "Peacemaking doesn't mean passivity. It is the act of interrupting injustice without mirroring injustice. It is the act of disarming evil without destroying the evildoer. The act of finding a third way that is neither fight nor flight, but the careful, arduous pursuit of reconciliation and justice. It is about a revolution of love that is big enough to set both the oppressed and the oppressors free. The Lord has called you and me to spread the good news of His love, not to harvest judgment. The Lord has placed a seed in your heart to produce a lot of fruit, not to produce spikes. The Lord wants you to use your life and your gift to provide life, not to bring damnation. The Lord wants to dwell in your heart. God bless you.